Ben Carter had been living on Meridian 7 for 3 years. It was a big space station that floated in the darkness between stars. Many different alien species lived there together. Some had scales. Some had fur. Some had no eyes at all. Ben was one of the few humans on the station, and most days he felt very alone. He worked in the agricultural section. He grew vegetables and fruits in special rooms filled with artificial sunlight. The work was quiet and simple. He liked it that way. Most aliens on the station ignored him, and he was fine with that. Humans were new to the galaxy. They had only made contact with alien life 20 years ago. Most species thought humans were weak and soft. They looked at Ben and saw a small creature with thin skin and no claws. They did not think much of him. Ben did not try to change their minds. He just did his job and stayed out of trouble. That changed on the day the Vorathi arrived. The Vorathi were famous across the galaxy. They came from a dark, frozen world far away from any bright star. Their planet was covered in ice and shadow. The Vorathi themselves were terrifying to look at. They stood 8 feet tall on average. Their bodies were covered in thick, armored scales that could stop a blade. They had 4 eyes that glowed faintly in the dark. Their hands ended in claws that could tear through metal. Every species in the galaxy feared the Vorathi. They were apex predators. Their history was filled with war and conquest. Even now, in times of peace, no one wanted to make them angry. When the news spread that a Vorathi diplomatic ship was coming to Meridian 7, the whole station became tense. Security teams doubled their patrols. Shop owners locked up their valuable goods. People walked quickly through the corridors with their heads down. Ben heard the rumors like everyone else. A Vorathi ambassador named Krelvash was coming to negotiate some kind of trade agreement. Ben did not care much about politics. He figured the Vorathi would stay in the diplomatic section, and he would never see them. He was wrong. The Vorathi ship docked on a cold morning. Ben was walking back from the biodome section, carrying a bag of seeds. The corridors were mostly empty. People were avoiding this part of the station because it was close to the docking bay. Ben turned a corner and stopped. 3 small shapes were huddled in the shadows ahead. They were about the size of large dogs, with the same armored scales and 4 glowing eyes as adult Vorathi, but these were clearly young. Cubs. They were pressed together in the darkest corner of the corridor, and they looked scared. Ben did not move. He barely breathed. Somewhere in the distance, alarms started blaring. Red lights flashed along the walls. A loud voice announced over the speakers that there was a security emergency. All personnel were ordered to stay in their quarters. The cubs whimpered. The noise and lights were scaring them even more. One of them, the smallest, made a high-pitched crying sound. Ben knew he should run. These were Vorathi cubs. Their parents could kill him in a second if they thought he was threatening their young. Every smart instinct told him to turn around and walk away. But the small one kept crying. Ben slowly lowered himself to the ground. He sat down on the cold floor with his back against the wall. He set his bag of seeds aside. He did not look directly at the cubs. He remembered reading somewhere that predators saw direct eye contact as a challenge. Instead, he looked at the floor and waited. The alarms kept blaring. The lights kept flashing. After a long moment, he heard movement. Soft clicks of claws on the floor. One of the cubs was creeping closer to him. Ben stayed perfectly still. The cub sniffed at his shoe. It made a curious chirping sound. Then it moved closer and sniffed at his hand. Its breath was cold against his skin. Ben slowly turned his palm upward, showing that he held no weapon. The cub sniffed his palm, then gently pressed its nose against it. Its scales were cool and smooth. The other 2 cubs watched from the shadows. After a minute, they began to creep forward too. Ben sat there for what felt like a very long time. One by one, the cubs came closer. They sniffed at him from every angle. They seemed confused by how warm his body was. On their frozen homeworld, nothing was warm like this. The smallest cub climbed into his lap. Ben held his breath as the little predator curled up against his stomach. It made a soft rumbling sound, almost like a cat purring. The other 2 cubs pressed against his sides. Ben did not move. He barely blinked. He could feel their hearts beating fast against him. They were still scared of the alarms and lights. But they had decided for some reason that this strange, soft creature was safe. Footsteps echoed down the corridor. Heavy footsteps, many of them. Ben looked up and saw a wall of security officers in full armor. Behind them stood the tallest Varathi he had ever seen, the ambassador, Krelvash. His 4 eyes glowed bright orange with what Ben assumed was rage. Beside him was a female Varathi, slightly smaller but just as deadly looking. The mother. The security officers raised their weapons. Not at the cubs. At Ben. "Do not move, human," one of them shouted. Ben could not have moved even if he wanted to. He had 3 predator cubs piled on top of him. Ambassador Krelvash pushed past the security officers. He stared down at Ben with those 4 burning eyes. His claws were extended, his jaw was clenched. Then he looked at his cubs. They were calm. The smallest one, the female, was actually asleep in the human's lap. Her brothers were pressed against his sides, their eyes half closed, their bodies relaxed for the first time since they had arrived on this strange, too bright station. Krelvash did not understand. His cubs had never behaved this way with outsiders. They had bitten 3 medtechs on the ship. They had scratched a diplomat who tried to pet them. They were wild little things, fierce and untrusting, as proper Varathi cubs should be. But here they were, curled up against a human like he was their nest parent. "How did you do this?" Krelvash asked. His voice was deep and rough, like stones grinding together. Ben swallowed hard. "I just sat down," he said quietly. They were scared. I figured if I did not move or make noise, maybe they would calm down. And they were cold. This part of the station is warmer than most. I think they came here looking for a cool, dark spot. But then the alarms scared them. Krelvash stared at him for a long moment. Then he turned to his mate. "The human is not lying," he said. "The cubs chose him." The female Varathi, Shira, stepped closer. She looked at her sleeping daughter, then at the human holding her. Something shifted in her expression. It was not quite trust, but it was not hostility either. "What is your name?" she asked. "Ben Carter." She nodded slowly. "Ben Carter. You will remember this day. So will we." The alarms finally stopped. The lights returned to normal. But Ben stayed where he was, 3 predator cubs sleeping peacefully against his body, as the most dangerous creatures in the galaxy watched him with something that might have been the beginning of respect. The next morning, Ben woke up in his small quarters expecting a normal day. He planned to check on his tomato plants, run some water tests in the hydroponic tanks, and eat lunch alone like he always did. But when he opened his door, Ambassador Krelvash was standing in the corridor. Ben almost screamed. He managed to turn it into a small coughing sound instead. "Human," Krelvash said, "I need to speak with you." Ben stepped back and let the massive Varathi inside. His quarters were small, designed for 1 person. Krelvash had to duck to fit through the door, and once inside, he took up most of the room. His armored tail knocked over a small plant on the shelf. Neither of them mentioned it. "I have a problem," the ambassador said. "The diplomatic summit begins today. It will last for 12 days. My mate and I must attend all sessions. We brought our cubs because leaving them on Vorath was not possible. Their grandmother was to watch them during the journey and the summit. But she became ill before we departed. Now we have no one." Ben was starting to understand where this was going. "The cubs are difficult," Krelvash continued. "They have bitten 4 members of my staff. They refuse to eat the food prepared for them. They hide in dark corners and attack anyone who approaches, except you." "Me?" Ben said. "Yesterday, in the corridor. They came to you willingly. They slept against you. My daughter has never slept near a stranger. She once tried to bite a healer who gave her medicine." Ben remembered the small cub who had curled up in his lap. She had seemed so peaceful. "I am asking you to watch my cubs during the summit," Krelvash said. "I will pay you whatever you require. You will be relieved of your normal duties. You will have access to anything you need. All I ask is that you keep them safe and calm." Ben opened his mouth to say no. He was a gardener. He knew nothing about raising alien predator children. What if he did something wrong? What if they got hurt? What if they hurt him? But then he thought about those three cubs huddled in the dark corridor, crying because the alarms scared them. He thought about how cold they had felt when they pressed against him. He thought about the small one, Mira, choosing to trust him when she did not trust anyone else. "Okay," he said. "I will try." Krelvash nodded once. If he was relieved, he did not show it. "I will have them brought to you within the hour. Their names are Vorik, Thesson, and Mira. Vorik is the oldest. Thesson is the middle child. Mira is the youngest and smallest. She is also the most troublesome." "Good to know," Ben said weakly. The ambassador left. Ben stood in his small quarters and wondered what he had gotten himself into. 1 hour later, the cubs arrived. They came with two nervous Varathi guards who looked relieved to hand them over. The moment the guards left, all three cubs rushed toward Ben. Mira reached him first. She jumped up and pressed her front claws against his chest, chirping happily. "Hello to you too," Ben said. He spent the first day learning about them. Vorik was serious and watchful. He liked to sit near the door and guard it. Thesson was curious about everything. He sniffed at all of Ben's plants, knocked over several containers, and tried to eat a pencil. Mira followed Ben everywhere. When he sat down, she climbed into his lap. When he walked, she trotted at his heels. The station had sent over information about Varathi dietary needs. The cubs needed raw meat, preferably cold. They needed water with certain minerals added. They could not eat anything sweet because it made them sick. Ben ordered supplies from the station kitchen and set up a feeding schedule. On the second day, he noticed the cubs were uncomfortable. They kept scratching at themselves and hiding in the darkest corners of his quarters. Ben realized the temperature was wrong. His rooms were set to a comfortable level for humans, which meant they were far too warm for creatures from an ice world. He adjusted the climate controls. The rooms dropped to near freezing. Ben put on a heavy coat and wrapped himself in blankets. The cubs immediately became more active and playful. On the third day, Mira would not eat. She turned away from the meat Ben offered. She crawled under his bed and refused to come out. Ben was worried. He contacted the Varathi medical team, and a doctor came to check on her. The doctor examined Mira and then looked at Ben with something like surprise. "She is not sick," the doctor said. "She is homesick. She misses her nest." On Voroth, cubs sleep in warm piles with their family. She has been sleeping alone since her grandmother left. She needs physical comfort. That night, Ben pushed his bed against the wall and piled extra blankets on the floor. He lay down in the middle of the nest he had made. All three cubs immediately climbed in with him. Mira burrowed under his arm. Vorik pressed against his back. Thesson sprawled across his legs. Ben slept colder than he had ever slept in his life. But when he woke up, Mira was eating again. Days passed. The cubs grew used to their temporary den. They learned Ben's schedule. They knew when he would wake up, when he would feed them, when he would take them for walks in the empty corridors during quiet hours. Ben learned their sounds too. Vorik growled when he was alert, but chirped when he was relaxed. Thesson made clicking noises when he was exploring something new. Mira had a special high-pitched hum that meant she was happy. She made that sound a lot when she was with Ben. One evening, Ambassador Shir-Ah came to check on her cubs. She stood in the doorway of Ben's cold quarters and watched the scene inside. Ben was sitting on the floor, reading something on a datapad. Thesson was asleep on top of his feet. Vorik was guarding the door as always. Mira was in Ben's lap, her head resting on his arm, making her happy humming sound. "They have never been this calm away from home," Shir-Ah said quietly. "They are good kids," Ben said. "They just needed to feel safe." Shir-Ah stepped inside. She moved slowly, carefully, like she was approaching something fragile. She knelt down near Ben and looked at her daughter. "On Voroth," she said, "we do not trust easily. Trust is dangerous. Trust gets you killed. We teach our cubs to be suspicious of everyone outside the family. To show fear or need is weakness." Ben did not say anything. He just listened. "But Mira trusted you," Shir-Ah continued. She trusted you before she knew anything about you. She saw something in you that made her feel safe. I do not understand it, but I am grateful for it. She reached out and touched her daughter's head gently. Mira stirred, but did not wake. The summit is going well, Shir-Ah said. My mate believes a good agreement will be reached. But I think the most important thing we have found on this station is not a trade deal. It is you, Ben Carter. A human who sits in the cold and the dark, caring for children who are not his own, children who could kill him with a careless swipe of their claws. They would not hurt me, Ben said. No, Shir-Ah agreed. They would not. And that tells me more about humans than any diplomatic speech ever could. She stood up and walked to the door. Before she left, she looked back at him one more time. The summit ends in 4 days, she said. Make them happy memories. They will remember this for the rest of their lives. Ben looked down at Mira sleeping in his lap. He thought about his quiet life before the Cubs arrived. He thought about how empty it had been. I will, he said. On the 8th day, Ben decided to take the Cubs somewhere special. The station's biodome was a massive enclosed garden at the center of Meridian 7. It was designed to help long-term residents feel less isolated. Inside, there were forests, meadows, streams, and even a small artificial lake. Different sections simulated different planetary environments. The Earth section had tall oak trees, green grass, and flowers that bloomed in every color. Ben had spent many hours in the biodome during his 3 years on the station. It was the closest thing to home he had found out here in the stars. He wanted to share it with the Cubs. Getting them there was tricky. He had to use maintenance corridors and back passages to avoid other station residents. Most species on Meridian 7 were still nervous about the Varathi Cubs. Ben did not want any incidents. They reached the biodome at dawn, station time. The lights inside were set to simulate an early morning. Everything was quiet. Nobody else was around. The Cubs stepped through the entrance and froze. They had never seen anything like this. On their homeworld, there were no forests, no grass, no flowers. Voroth was a world of ice and stone and endless darkness. The only plants were pale fungi that grew in caves. But here, everything was green and alive. Thesson was the first to move. He ran forward and shoved his nose into a patch of grass. He sniffed so hard he sneezed. Then he rolled onto his back and wiggled, feeling the soft blades against his scales. He made happy clicking sounds. Vorik walked slowly, carefully, like a soldier exploring unknown territory. He examined a tree trunk. He sniffed a flower. He dipped his claws in the stream and watched the water ripple. Mira stayed close to Ben. She pressed against his leg and looked around with wide eyes. Everything was strange and new. She did not know if she should be excited or scared. It is okay, Ben said softly. Nothing here will hurt you. He led her deeper into the Earth section. They walked past oak trees and birch trees and willows with long hanging branches. Birds flew overhead, small robots designed to look and sound real. Mira watched them with hunting eyes but did not chase them. They stopped in a clearing near the center of the biodome. There was a wide open space here, covered in soft grass. Above, the dome ceiling showed the blackness of space. But the lighting panels were slowly brightening, simulating the approach of daytime. Ben sat down in the grass. Mira climbed into his lap. Vorik and Thesson wandered nearby, still exploring. Ben looked up at the ceiling controls. He had an idea. The biodome's lighting system could simulate any environment. It could create sunset colors, storm clouds, or starlight. Ben found the control panel on his datapad and made an adjustment. The ceiling panels shifted. The artificial lights changed. And suddenly, warm golden sunlight poured down into the clearing. Real sunlight. Not the dim red glow of the Varathi star. Not the cold blue lights of the station corridors. True, bright yellow sunlight from the nearby star that Meridian 7 orbited. The Cubs froze. Vorik backed away from the light, growling uncertainly. Thesson pressed himself flat against the ground. Mira's claws dug into Ben's leg, and she made a small, frightened sound. Ben gently stroked her back. "It is just light," he said. "It will not hurt you. Watch." He held out his arm so the sunlight fell across his skin. It was warm. It was wonderful. He had not felt real sun in months. Mira watched his arm carefully. The sunlight did not burn him. He was not in pain. He was smiling. Slowly, very slowly, she uncurled from his lap. She crept forward on her belly, inch by inch, until one of her front claws touched the edge of the sunlit grass. The warmth spread through her scales. It was different from any warmth she had ever felt before. This was not body heat or artificial heating. This was something alive, something ancient. The fire of a star, reaching across millions of miles to touch her. She moved further into the light. Her whole body was glowing now, soaking in the warmth. And then something strange began to happen. Her scales started to change color. The dull gray that covered her body began to shimmer. Deep purple appeared first, spreading from her spine outward. Then midnight blue. Then streaks of silver that caught the light like tiny mirrors. Mira looked down at herself and made a sound Ben had never heard before. It was a deep, resonant hum that seemed to come from her whole body. A sound of pure joy. Thesson heard it. He lifted his head and stared at his sister. The light was calling to him too. He crept forward until he was beside her. The moment the sun touched his scales, the colors came. His were different, deep green and bronze and flashes of gold. Vorik resisted the longest. He paced at the edge of the shadows, torn between his instinct to protect and his desire to join his siblings. Finally, Mira looked back at him and chirped. It was an invitation, a promise. He stepped into the light. His colors were the darkest. Black that shimmered with hidden red, like the heart of a dying star. But they were beautiful. They were all beautiful. The three cubs stood together in the sunlight, their true colors blazing for the first time in their lives. On their dark homeworld, these colors never appeared. The Varathi did not even know their children had them until they were much older and could be taken to the deep thermal vents where faint light sometimes glowed. But here, in the warmth of an alien sun, the cubs' hidden selves were revealed. Ben watched from the edge of the clearing. He had moved back into the shade when the cubs started changing. This was their moment. He did not want to intrude, but Mira had other ideas. She turned and looked at him. Her 4 eyes were bright with joy. Her purple and silver scales glittered. She chirped at him, once, twice. When he did not move, she bounded across the grass and grabbed his sleeve in her teeth. She was gentle. Her jaw could crush bone, but she held the fabric like it was precious. She pulled. "What are you doing?" Ben asked, laughing. She pulled harder. She wanted him to come into the light. She wanted him to be part of this moment with them. Okay, Ben said. "I am coming." He let her drag him into the center of the clearing. The sunlight wrapped around him like a warm blanket. He sat down in the grass, and immediately all 3 cubs pressed against him. Mira climbed into his lap. Thesson leaned against his side. Vorik sat behind him, close enough that Ben could feel his warmth. They stayed like that for a long time. The cubs made their deep humming sounds of contentment. Their colors blazed and shifted in the light. Ben closed his eyes and felt the sun on his face and the weight of 3 small predators trusting him completely. He did not know they were being watched. At the biodome entrance, Ambassador Krelvash stood in the shadows with his mate and several other diplomats. They had come looking for the cubs when they were not in Ben's quarters. Krelvash stared at the scene in the clearing. His children displaying their colors. His children wrapped around a human like he was their nest parent. His children sharing their most sacred moment with an outsider. Beside him, a Kalori diplomat whispered to his colleague. "We were told humans were prey animals, weak and helpless, barely worth notice." Krelvash did not respond. He was watching his youngest daughter, fierce little Mira who trusted no one, nuzzle her face against the human's cheek and hum with happiness. He was beginning to understand that the galaxy had made a terrible mistake about humans. Ambassador Krelvash did not announce himself right away. He stood in the shadows of the biodome entrance and watched the scene in the clearing for a long time. His cubs were displaying their true colors. This was sacred among the Varathi. It only happened when a cub felt completely safe. It meant they trusted their surroundings so deeply that they were willing to reveal their most hidden self. On Vorath, cubs only showed their colors inside the family den, surrounded by parents and grandparents and siblings. Never outside. Never with strangers. Yet here were his children, colors blazing like festival lights, curled around a human they had known for barely 8 days. The other diplomats shifted nervously behind Krelvash. They did not understand what they were seeing, but they could tell it was important. The Chalori ambassador kept whispering to his assistant. A Threni delegate was recording everything on a small device. Finally, Shir-Ah stepped forward. She walked into the biodome and crossed the clearing. The cubs looked up when they saw her coming. Their colors dimmed slightly with surprise. But they did not hide them. They were not ashamed. Ben started to stand, but Shir-Ah held up a clawed hand. "Do not move," she said. "I want to see something." She knelt down at the edge of the sunlit circle. Her own scales were dull gray, as adult Varathi scales always were in normal light. But as she watched her children, something in her expression softened. "When I was a cub," she said quietly, "I did not show my colors until I was nearly grown. I was too afraid. Our den was attacked twice when I was young. I learned that showing your true self was dangerous. Weakness invited death." Ben listened. He did not know what to say. "My children have never been afraid the way I was," Shir-Ah continued. "They grew up in peace. But they are still Varathi. They still carry our instincts, our caution, our distrust of outsiders. For them to show their colors to you, after only a few days?" She shook her head slowly. "You have done something I do not understand." "I did not do anything," Ben said. "They chose to trust me. I just tried not to break that trust." Shir-Ah looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned to face the biodome entrance. "Come," she called out. "All of you, come and see what a human has done." Krelvash walked into the clearing. Behind him came the Chalori ambassador, the Threni delegate, a Moravi trade minister, and several others Ben did not recognize. They formed a semicircle around the sunlit patch of grass where Ben sat with the cubs. The cubs did not run. They did not hide their colors. Mira stayed in Ben's lap. Vorik stayed at his back. Thesson pressed closer to his side. They looked at the crowd of aliens watching them. And they did not flinch. "Among my people," Krelvash said, addressing the other diplomats, "the showing of colors is one of our most private rituals. It is done only in the innermost family den. Only with those we trust with our lives. For my cubs to do this here, in the open, with an outsider present," he paused, "it means they have accepted him as family." The Kalori ambassador made a sound of disbelief. "Family? He is human. They are Varathi. They have nothing in common." "That is what I thought," Krelvash said. "I was wrong." He stepped forward until he was standing directly in front of Ben. His shadow fell across the human and the cubs. But the cubs did not move away. Mira actually pressed closer to Ben, like she was protecting him. "We came to this station to negotiate trade deals," Krelvash said. "We came expecting the usual games of politics and power. We brought our cubs because we had no choice, and we expected them to be miserable here, far from home, surrounded by strange species who did not understand them." He looked down at Mira, whose scales were shimmering purple and silver. "Instead, we found this human. A gardener. A quiet man who grows vegetables and keeps to himself. A man who, when he found frightened cubs in a dark corridor, did not run away. He sat down. He waited. He let them come to him." The Threni delegate tilted his head. "That does not seem remarkable." "To you, perhaps not," Krelvash said. "But I have been a diplomat for 30 years. I have met hundreds of species. When faced with Varathi cubs, they all react the same way. They run. They hide. They call for security. They see predators and they want protection." He looked at Ben. This human saw frightened children. He saw that they were cold and scared and lost. and his first instinct was not to protect himself. His first instinct was to help them. The clearing was silent. Even the artificial birds had stopped singing. "I have underestimated humans," Krelvash said. "My people have underestimated them. The galaxy has underestimated them. We looked at their soft bodies and their thin skin and their lack of claws, and we saw weakness. But we were looking at the wrong things." He knelt down until he was at eye level with Ben. His 4 orange eyes were intense but not hostile. "Strength is not just claws and armor," he said. "Strength is sitting in the cold so that frightened cubs can be comfortable. Strength is opening yourself to creatures who could kill you with a thought. Strength is caring for the young of another species as if they were your own." He placed one massive clawed hand on the ground near Ben's knee. It was a gesture of respect among the Vorathi. "You have shown more strength in 8 days than most warriors show in a lifetime, Ben Carter. My family will not forget it." Shira moved forward and knelt beside her mate. She reached out and touched Ben's shoulder, her claws gentle on his jacket. "On Vorroth," she said, "we have a word for those who are family by choice rather than blood. Krentai. It means chosen kin. It is a bond that cannot be broken. Today, in the light of an alien sun, my cubs have made you Krentai." Ben felt his throat tighten. He did not know what to say. 3 alien predator cubs were pressed against him. Their parents were kneeling before him. A crowd of galactic diplomats was watching. Mira looked up at him and chirped. Her scales flashed silver in the sunlight. "Thank you," Ben said finally. His voice was rough. "I do not know if I deserve it. But thank you." Krelvash stood. He turned to face the other diplomats. "Let the record show," he announced, "that the Vorathi Dominion wishes to formally extend our hand to humanity. We believe they have been misjudged. We believe they have much to offer the galactic community. And we pledge to support their advancement among the elder species." The Kalori ambassador looked stunned. "Ambassador, this is highly irregular. We have procedures, protocols. You cannot simply declare support for a species because of one human and some cubs." "I am Vorathi," Krelvash said. "We do not follow your procedures. We follow our instincts, and my instincts tell me that humanity is worth more than the galaxy knows." He looked back at Ben, still sitting in the sunlight with 3 young predators curled around him like he was the safest place in the universe. "The summit ends in 2 days," Krelvash said. "Until then, my cubs remain in your care. After that," he paused, "we will see what the future holds." He turned and walked out of the biodome. One by one, the other diplomats followed. Shira lingered a moment longer. She brushed her claws against Mira's head, then against Ben's shoulder. "Thank you," she whispered, "for giving them the sun." Then she was gone. Ben sat alone in the clearing with the cubs. The sunlight was warm. The colors of their scales were slowly fading as they relaxed, but they were still beautiful. Mira was already falling asleep in his lap. 2 more days, he thought. Then they would leave. He did not want to think about that yet. The last day came too quickly. Ben woke up before the station lights brightened. The cubs were still sleeping around him. Mira was curled against his chest, her breathing slow and steady. Vorik was at his feet, positioned so he could watch the door even in sleep. Thesson was sprawled across Ben's legs, twitching slightly as he dreamed. Ben lay still for a long time. He did not want to wake them. He did not want this day to start. The Vorathi ship was scheduled to depart at noon, station time. All the diplomatic meetings were finished. The trade agreement had been signed. There was nothing left to keep Ambassador Krelvash and his family on Meridian 7. Nothing except the bond that had formed between a human gardener and 3 young predators. The cubs woke slowly. Mira stirred first, yawning and stretching her claws. She looked up at Ben with sleepy eyes and chirped her morning greeting. He rubbed the spot behind her ear that she liked, and she hummed with contentment. They ate breakfast together. Ben had ordered extra meat for their last meal, the good stuff that cost more than his weekly food budget. The cubs ate happily, not understanding that this was goodbye. At 10 o'clock, a message arrived on Ben's datapad. The Vorathi delegation was gathering at the docking bay. Ambassador Krelvash requested that Ben bring the cubs to say farewell. Ben read the message 3 times. Then he set down the pad and looked at the cubs. "Okay," he said. "It is time to go." They walked through the station together one last time. Ben used the maintenance corridors again, avoiding crowds. The cubs trotted beside him, unaware of what was coming. Thesson stopped to sniff at interesting doors. Vorik walked with his usual serious guard stance. Mira held onto the edge of Ben's jacket with her teeth, her favorite way to stay close. The docking bay was huge and cold. The Varathi ship loomed at the far end, a massive vessel of dark metal and sharp angles. It looked dangerous. It looked like it was made for war, not diplomacy. Ambassador Krelvash and Shira were waiting near the boarding ramp. A dozen Varathi guards stood behind them in formal formation. Several station officials were present to see the delegation off. The cubs ran to their parents the moment they saw them. Mira jumped at her mother, chirping excitedly. Thesson showed his father something he had been carrying, a small stone from the biodome. Vorik stood at attention, trying to look dignified like the adult guards. Ben hung back. He watched the reunion from a distance. This was where he belonged now, on the outside. But Shira looked up and caught his eye. She said something to her cubs, and all 3 of them turned around. Mira ran back to Ben. She slammed into his legs and wrapped her claws around him. She was making sounds he had never heard before. High-pitched whimpering sounds. Sad sounds. She knew. Somehow, she knew. Thesson came next. He pressed against Ben's side and made clicking sounds. His version of crying. Vorik walked over slowly, trying to maintain his dignity, but his tail was drooping and his eyes were dim. Ben knelt down so he was at their level. All 3 cubs pressed against him. Mira shoved her face into his neck. Thesson leaned on his shoulder. Vorik stood guard beside them, but his body was shaking. "I know," Ben said softly. "I know. I am going to miss you too." Ambassador Krelvash approached. He looked at his children clinging to the human, and his expression was unreadable. "They do not want to leave," he said. "I do not want them to leave either," Ben admitted. "But they have to go home. They belong with you, on Vorrath. That is where their family is." "You are their family now too," Shira said. She had joined them. "They will not forget you, Ben Carter. Varathi never forget their Krentai." Ben nodded. His throat was too tight to speak. He pulled back gently and looked at each of the cubs. He touched his forehead to Vorik's, then to Thesson's, then to Mira's. It was a human gesture. They had learned to understand it during their time together. "Be brave," he told them. "Remember what the sunlight felt like. Carry it with you, even when everything is dark and cold. And take care of each other." Mira made a small sound. She stepped back and did something strange. She scratched at her own shoulder, working a claw under one of her scales. A moment later, she pulled out a small, loose scale. It was the size of a coin, shimmering with purple and silver in the station lights. She held it out to Ben. He looked at Shira. Her eyes had widened. "That is a great honor," Shira said quietly. "Among my people, we only give scales to true family. It is a piece of ourselves, a promise that distance cannot break the bond." Ben took the scale carefully. It was warm from Mira's body. It glittered in his palm like a tiny piece of starlight. "Thank you," he whispered. "I will keep it safe. Forever." Mira chirped and pressed her forehead against his one more time. Then she turned and walked to her mother. Thesson and Vorik followed. They did not look back. The cubs boarded the ship with their parents. The ramp closed. The engines hummed to life. Through the docking bay windows, Ben watched the massive vessel detach from the station and drift into space. He stood there until the ship was just a small dot among the stars. Then even that disappeared. Ben looked down at the scale in his hand. It was still warm. He walked back to his quarters alone. Life on Meridian 7 returned to normal. Ben went back to his job in the agricultural section. He grew vegetables. He ran water tests. He ate lunch alone. The station residents who had avoided him before still avoided him, though some looked at him with new curiosity now. Word had spread about the human who cared for Varathi cubs. Months passed, then a year, then several years. Ben kept the scale in a small box beside his bed. Sometimes, when he missed the cubs, he would take it out and hold it. It never stopped shimmering. He received messages sometimes. Official communications from the Varathi Diplomatic Corps, updates on the cubs' growth and development. Vorik was training to be a warrior. Thesson was studying science, fascinated by plants and growing things after his time with Ben. Mira was trouble, as always. She had bitten 2 tutors and refused to attend formal events. Ben smiled every time he read about her. Then, 7 years after the cubs left, a new message arrived. It was not official, it was personal. It came directly from Ambassador Krelvash. The message was short. She is coming. Ben did not understand until the next day, when station security contacted him. A Varathi ship had arrived. A young female was requesting permission to board. She had asked for Ben Carter by name. He went to the docking bay with his heart pounding. The ship was smaller than the diplomatic vessel from years ago, sleeker, faster. The ramp lowered, and a figure emerged. She was tall now, nearly 7 feet. Her scales were thick with adult armor, shimmering with deep purple and silver in the station lights. Her 4 eyes glowed bright orange. She moved like a hunter, all grace and power. But Ben recognized her immediately. Mira, he breathed. She crossed the docking bay in long strides. She stopped in front of him and looked down. She was huge now, terrifying to anyone who did not know her. Her claws could tear through steel. Her jaws could crush stone. She knelt down so they were face to face, and then she pressed her forehead against his, the way he had taught her years ago. I came back, she said. Her voice was deeper now, rougher, but still hers. I told you I would. Behind her, 2 small shapes emerged from the ship. They were cubs, barely the size of large dogs. They had purple and silver scales and bright, curious eyes. These are mine, Mira said. I wanted them to meet you. Ben stared at the cubs, then at Mira, then back at the cubs. You brought your children to meet me? You showed me what sunlight was, Mira said. You showed me what trust was. You showed me that family is not just blood. It is choice. It is care. It is sitting in the cold so someone else can be warm. She stood up and looked down at him with those fierce eyes. The galaxy thinks humans are weak, she said. They see soft bodies and no claws. They do not understand. But my people are starting to understand. And more will follow. Because of you. Ben looked at the cubs creeping toward him. They were sniffing at his shoes, just like their mother had years ago. He sat down on the cold floor of the docking bay. He let them come to him. And somewhere across the galaxy, the story spread. The story of the human who sat beside monsters and made them feel safe. The human who showed predator cubs the sunlight. The human who proved that the greatest strength is not in claws or armor, but in the simple choice to care. The galaxy was learning what the Varathi cubs had discovered long ago. Humans were not prey. They were the ones who sat in the dark, waiting patiently, until even the fiercest creatures trusted them. And that made them the most dangerous species of all.